In the previous video, we learned how to use CSS selectors to select tags containing the data we are interested in. In this video, we're going to learn how to look at an actual website's code and develop our own selectors to interact with the website and select data from it. To do this, we'll first learn how to use a browser's developer tools. In this case, we'll be using Chrome. And with this, we can inspect the HTML and CSS of a real website. And we can learn how to use the developer tools to develop and debug the selectors that we will use to scrape the data we want from the website. Let's take a look at a real website. We're going to look at the commit log for Microsoft's project that's open source TypeScript. You can see lots of different people have committed and left comments explaining what they've done. If I was interested in downloading all the records of the commit messages, I can see what they did, who posted them, and we can see sort of when people are frequently making changes and when people aren't. To open the Chrome developer tools, right-click the page and you can press Inspect. And you can see it opens up in this pane here. Alternatively, you can press F12. Let's take a look at some of this information. So you can see that this up here is all HTML, and you can see it has classes and IDs and many other attributes that we haven't looked at. And then down here, if I select a tag, I can see all the CSS. If I want to zoom in on a particular element, I can right-click again and go Inspect, and it will zoom into that sort of element. So the first thing to note is that all commit messages and all authors, they all look relatively the same. They're the same font, the same size, so we can be fairly confident that they all have the same class. So if we zoom in on an author, we can see that the tag has the class commit author. So I'm fairly confident they'll all have the same class. If we zoom in on the message, we can see that they have the class message. So we can be fairly confident that they all have the same class as well. Now we can use this to go through the page and gather all the data in each tag with those classes. To test our queries, we can use the console in the developer tools. I'm going to zoom in to make this a little bit easier for you to view. So we saw that each tag containing a commit message likely all has the class message. So we can test that out by going $$, and then open up some brackets, and then in the brackets, in quotes, we're going to put our selector. So here we saw a class message, so we'll use .message and see what that returns. So you can see it returns a lot of a.message, which means it's an anchor with the class message. If we expand those out and hover over it, you can see that it's highlighting the messages, which means that it's working. However, one thing to note right now is that there's a link in between these messages, and that's rendering two different tags. This is why it's good to be able to debug in the browser, because now we can highlight and see immediately if we're getting the wrong data, because this isn't exactly what we want. We want everything within that. So let's zoom out a little bit. Right now what we're looking at is this link here. However, the middle of that commit message is another link. So let's zoom out. Let's go one level up, this commit title. Maybe that'll give us more luck. So let's try that. You can see that this is a paragraph with the class commit title. So let's look at that. Maybe this is giving us better luck. So you can see now this is including only the entire message. Let's go to the very bottom as well and make sure it's getting everything we want correctly. As you can see, this returns the entire element. It returns an entire node. If we expand this out, we can see all the different properties of this single tag. One of the properties, as you can see, is inner text. So this is what we want in particular. So if I close this, I'm going to print out the inner text of each of these nodes. Now, this is in JavaScript, so I don't want you to worry about it. I'm just doing this as a demonstration. You won't need to do this while you're writing Python. And you can see in each of these rows, it corresponds to a commit message. And so this is the first bit of web scraping we've actually done here. Like I said, I don't want you to get too worried about the JavaScript that I just wrote. All you need to know is that two $signs with a query inside of them will help you debug and make sure that your query selector is working. Now I want to talk about XPaths. When all else fails, when an element doesn't have a class, it doesn't have IDs, you can't use other IDs or classes that are nearby to identify it, you can use something called XPaths. And these identify a tag by its position in the HTML hierarchy. This comes with a big warning. XPaths are not ideal at all, because if a website makes a small change, like adding or removing an element, your query might break. Whereas style and tag selectors and ID selectors are a lot more robust. They're a lot more likely to stay the same. So let's look at an example of using an XPath. So you can see that up here there's something with a class called container, but there's probably lots of different divs that have that class. And then here, this has a whole bunch of classes. So, maybe it's not super obvious. And this doesn't have a class or an ID. It's not entirely obvious. Now, what you could do is you could, select this class, select the inner class, and then select the second span. Or you could go inside here. You could find, okay, you have this link here. You might be able to grab that and then select its parent. But for the sake of this example, let's say there's no way around it. Well, what you can do is you can go right-click, copy XPaths. Now, when testing it, instead of using double $signs, you use $sign then X. And then you can pass in your XPaths. But note that this XPath has quotes within it. So I'm going to use single quotes here. And you can see that that accurately selects this span here. Now, as you might have also seen, you can go copy selector. However, these selectors, as you can see, are quite ugly. You can probably figure out a cleaner selector if you try, but just as an example, what this is doing is it's going, okay, this is a tag's ID. Look at its immediate child. It is a div with all of these classes. This means it's getting a whole bunch of classes, and it's demanding that this div has all these classes. Then it's saying, get the second child of that. That's a div. Get the nav of that. That's a child as well, and then it gets another child. So in pinch, you can use these selectors and you can use XPaths, but remember what you're going to be doing most of the time is trying to get a whole bunch of data, right? And what you want to find is commonalities between the data that you want to scrape. And so this environment, using the console, using the developer tools, trying out a query and comparing it to make sure that it's exactly what you want, because it's very easy for somebody to go like this in their Python code, thinking, yeah, that's going to work exactly as I want. And it's not obvious until you're in the browser that you see, oh, actually, this is getting two separate messages, and we're skipping part of our message. So this is the environment you want to play around in. And you'll also get very, very innately familiar with the HTML and how to find the data you want on a website. In the next video, we'll finally get around to using Python to run these queries and automate the browser for us.